When I think about decentralized finance and like what we're trying to achieve, right? We can't just kind of like iterate in our like small world. Like we have to like kind of innovate and push beyond it. I'm extremely bullish AMMs as like a market structure, but I think that there are also other market structures that like could, exist in the future. And then I think we also want to discover them and have them be part of the Uniswap ecosystem.
Bienvenue à Bankless. Bankless Nation, it is that time of year again. ETHCC, the Ethereum Community Conference in Paris, France. All the teams, all the projects, all the protocols save some of their biggest announcements for ETHCC, except for the ones saving it for permissionless, of course. You might remember last year, ETHCC was marked by the time in which 3 teams all had the first ZK EVM. Yeah, that was a year ago at ETHCC. And today, the day I'm recording this, Sunday, the day before ETHCC begins, we already have a massive release out of Uniswap Labs, a brand new protocol called UniswapX, a new half of Uniswap that complements the rest of the Uniswap protocol, the yin to the yang of Uniswap's V1 through 4. Something brand new that fills in the picture of the Uniswap project. Seriously, the best way to describe this is that it's the other half of Uniswap. It's the half of Uniswap that is meant to make Uniswap the best place for swappers to swap tokens. Today on the show, we have Hayden Adams, the day before he gives his ETHCC main stage talk, releasing UniswapX into the wild. What is UniswapX? I'm glad you asked. UniswapX is a protocol for competitive order execution in DeFi. It is a protocol that exists on top of Uniswap's 1 through 4, as well as all the other liquidity sources in DeFi, that ensures that the market produces the best possible order execution for anyone looking to swap tokens using UniswapX. The idea behind UniswapX is that it maximally protects swappers ahead of MEV extractors, ahead of arbitrageurs, ahead of frontrunners, to ensure that the average Joe who just wants to swap some tokens gets the best possible a deal that the market will allow for. In this episode with Hayden, we go under the hood of UniswapX, what it is, how it works, and why it's needed. So you'll learn about UniswapX and how it uses a Dutch auction to maximize swapper returns, how this Dutch auction mechanism also ensures that MEV is maximally retained by swappers. Also, how UniswapX massively reduces bridge risk and almost entirely abstracts away bridging altogether, freeing up capital to not have to be stuck inside of bridges where it's vulnerable. And also how UniswapX formalizes a new kind of player in the game of making trading in DeFi maximally efficient. As a disclosure, of course, Uniswap is a sponsor of Bankless, and Bankless also does hold some Uni tokens, which you can see all the details of, as well as all of our other disclosures at bankless.com/disclosures. So let's go and get talking to Hayden Adams all about this new UniswapX protocol. But first, we're going to talk about our preferred centralized exchange for crypto in 2023, KRAKEN, because you got to get your fiat boomer bucks into the world of crypto somehow. So use KRAKEN, again, our preferred exchange in 2023. If you do not have an account with KRAKEN, consider clicking the link in the show notes to sign up with one today. KRAKEN Pro has easily become the best crypto trading platform in the industry. The place I use to check the charts and the crypto prices, even when I'm not looking to place a trade. On KRAKEN Pro, you'll have access to advanced charting tools, real-time market data, and lightning-fast trade execution, all inside their spiffy new modular interface. KRAKEN's new customizable modular layout lets you tailor your trading experience to suit your needs. Pick and choose your favorite modules and place them anywhere you want in your screen. With KRAKEN Pro, you have that power. Whether you are a seasoned pro or just starting out, join thousands of traders who trust KRAKEN Pro for their crypto trading needs. Visit pro.kraken.com to get started today. Introducing Polygon 2.0, the value layer for the internet. For too long, the limitations of blockchains have held back app development and stifled user adoption. The internet allows anyone to create and exchange information. What's missing is a value layer that lets anyone exchange, store, and program value. That's where Polygon 2.0 comes in. Polygon Labs has unveiled a series of innovations that will radically alter the Polygon ecosystem and Web3 as a whole. By leveraging groundbreaking ZK innovations, such as Polygon ZK EVM, the next iteration of the best-in-class Plonky 2 proving system, and a first-of-its-kind ZK-powered interoperability layer, Polygon 2.0 will give users and devs unlimited scalability and unified liquidity. Right now, there is a Polygon improvement proposal regarding a potential ZK-powered upgrade of Polygon Proof of Stake. If approved, Polygon Proof of Stake would become a Layer 2 ZK EVM Validium. So make your voice heard on this proposal by joining the Polygon Discord today. You have a chance to help the Polygon community give the internet the value layer it deserves. Bonjour, Bankless Nation. It is the Sunday before ETHCC, and I'm here with Hayden Adams, who has yet another announcement out of the Uniswap ecosystem. Hayden, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Bonjour, great to be here. First time in Paris, and first time at ETHCC. But yeah, Uniswap, we are keep cranking out the hits. Been pretty busy, hard at work. And most recently we announced Uniswap v4, which is new version of the Uniswap protocol, and currently being built in public, and it basically makes it easier for people to create customized liquidity pools. We talked about this last time, hooks, and what you start to see is there's this thing called the routing problem, and as AMMs get more flexible and basically what happens is routing gets harder over time. And routing was already actually pretty hard. So today we have hundreds of thousands of tokens. We have 4 versions of the protocol. We have multiple chains. We have other liquidity sources. And then you also start to think about things like MEV and trade-offs between slippage and latency and best execution. And it starts to get really complicated, and definitely with Uniswap v4 and hooks, it actually gets even one step more complicated.
Right.
And traditionally to date, we have our current open source. We call it the auto router, which optimizes routing across Uniswap v4, v3, v2. And what we've been working on today, I guess a long build up, is what we call UniswapX, which is a Dutch auction-based protocol for routing and aggregating liquidity. And we think it's really powerful, and we think it will help provide. It basically improves prices, but also has a bunch of UX benefits. Allows for gas-free trading. No slippage on failed transactions. It starts to internalize some MEV. And provides a bunch of other cool features. I don't know. I don't know if I say the other big one.
Well, we'll get to every single bit here, and for the Bankless listeners out there that aren't familiar, ETHCC is the place where you announce things. This is where announcements comes to be, and like I said, this is the Sunday before, so we're going to be seeing a slew of announcements coming out, and we're getting the first one here with Uniswap X, which is this new thing. This is the thing that Uniswap is announcing, this thing called Uniswap X. But I want to actually set more of the stage, and you did a good job, but I want to make sure that we are talking about the problem being addressed here. Uniswap is cool because every single token gets its own exchange. It gets its own pool. Same thing with Uniswap v2. v3 made it even more complex, if you will, with this concentrated liquidity. And then when we had you on not too long ago, like 4 weeks ago or something, about Uniswap v4, that whole thing, Uniswap v4, was even more expressivity in Uniswap pools, more complexity. And the big takeaway, I called it Uniswap's hook-centric roadmap to go in parallel with Ethereum's roll-up-centric roadmap, where Ethereum's doing this thing where it's pushing complexity to the edges. It's like, hey, roll-ups, you do all the execution stuff, and we will just settle. And Uniswap's kind of doing something similar with its hooks in Uniswap v4. It's, hey, there's a world of expressivity and features and different ways of constructing a pool that we want to enable Uniswap pool builders, AMMs, to be able to build. And what I think you're leading up to is like, that's all great. We have as much expressivity as we need in Uniswap pools, except we're still left with a bunch of complexity. Even though it's been pushed to the margins and Uniswap as a base is simple, the complexity still exists. There's so many pools. Now pools are different. There are different standards of pools. And so Uniswap X is a solution to harness all of that complexity, would you say?
Yeah, and I'd say also, when I was on last time, we talked about different ways of achieving decentralization. And, there's like the most pure form of decentralization is like automation. And you should automate what you can automate, and with immutable smart contracts. And then the next level of achieving decentralization, and we talk about this more in the lens of governance, but the next level is just like incentivization and markets. And if you have like a competitive market structure where people are incentivized to do what they should do, then that's like more decentralized than something that needs to be governed, which is like the third tier. And for that, you achieve that through just like greater distribution of governance rights. And so what we're talking about here is taking the routing. Like we've already talked about this in the context of the protocol, which is highly decentralized. And what we're trying to do is do that for the routing problem, which is people tend to think about like AMMs as both like routing, like both swapping and routing, as well as liquidity provision, all bundled together.
Routing, swapping, and liquidity provision.
Well,
three different things.
Yeah, but like, swapping. How do you route the swaps through liquidity? But people think of it as like, okay, you have the AMM and you try to find the best price through it. But I think, you can start to unbundle them a bit, right? Because like, today most interfaces have like different strategies for how they route through pools, right? And there's various aggregators, and they're trying to like find every possible liquidity source. There's the Uniswap UI, which today basically just like has like tries to discover across Uniswap pools. And what we're trying to do here with UniswapX is create a competitive marketplace for routing. Right? It's almost a way of like achieving more efficiency through decentralization. Right? Like the more people that can participate in finding the best routes, discovering the best routes, discovering the best pools, the better, discovering all the different liquidity, the better prices you can get in the long run, if you can create a competitive marketplace.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do with UniswapX is create a competitive marketplace for routing across liquidity. And that liquidity can be on-chain, it can be off-chain, but yeah, that's essentially what we're trying to do here.
Creating a competitive marketplace for routing. So with this explosion, like Uniswap, even at its earliest days in V1, was an explosion of pools. The cool thing about Uniswap is you can list any token. And that only got furthered with Uniswap V2, V3, and V4. Now we have pools all over the place. And so the routing problem, maybe to define the routing problem, is that with all of these pools and all these different sources of liquidity, getting the best price for your trade is a computational problem because there's so many pools out there. And so what you're trying to do with UniswapX, a marketplace for competitive order routing, is you're just giving that up to the market and saying, hey, market, instead of the Uniswap router being the thing that manages all of that complexity, you're just giving it up to the marketplace and allowing routers to come in and service that role to make sure that traders and swappers get the best liquidity, get the best offer.
Yes, and I think the thing I'd add to that is that because we're doing this on a blockchain, it starts to touch on a bunch of other problems in complexity, right? We have like you could do this in TradFi, you could think if you think about it purely in TradFi terms, and it's like just like optimizing routes, but we also deal with things like gas, and then we deal with things like the fact that validators exist and they get to choose the order of transactions within a given block, right? And that starts to take us into what people call, I guess I only found out recently that it was rebranded from minor extractable value to maximal extractable value, but then it takes you into like MEV territory, gas optimizations and latency, and there's all these other things as well. Another thing is that like there's also another area of like price improvement is batching. People talk about batching all the time. Like if people are trading in the same direction at the same time, if you just like route it through a Uniswap pool in the back of the Uniswap pool, right, then like that's less optimal than like netting it all together. So by creating like a kind of a competitive marketplace for it, in where people are competing in an auction, it basically forces people to find the most sophisticated strategies that offer the most price improvement. And so sometimes it might mean like executing multiple transactions at the same time, and in that way, like you're saving some gas costs, and you're also maybe internalizing some of the price improvement for swappers. But yeah, I mean, look, the real goal is to like deliver value to users at the end of the day, and so. And then the other thing I'll mention is that, like, again, because we're on blockchains, there's a bunch of like UX implications of, just like gas, right? So with UniswapX, orders are off-chain signatures that are then, so rather than like signing transactions that are sent directly to the chain, users sign off-chain signatures that express their intent, as is a word of the moment in crypto. And that is sort of an auction of a price decaying auction, and then people are competing. As soon as the price hits a point where people are willing to fill it, the fillers, a new class participant, are submitting it to the chain, and those fillers look similar to the block builders of today, and likely will be a lot of the of overlap, or similar to like the trading firms and arbitrageurs. And because orders just start off as off-chain signatures, you also get benefits like if your transaction is going to fail, it never gets submitted. And also just like being able to abstract away gas for users. So if I want to swap, USDC for DAI, I don't want to think about like ETH as an input. Right today, when you swap USD for a DAI, your ETH balance goes down a little bit. Here, with UniswapX, you just sign a message, someone else pays the ETH, and that's reflected in the price that you get. So there's a bunch of other benefits as well, but yeah, there is the first thing you said as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things under the hood there that I want to unpack, like the gas, the MEV, all of that kind of stuff. But really, just to start at the very, very top, how is this different? And just to make sure that we're setting the table appropriately, how is this different from like a DEX aggregator or some of the other liquidity optimizer services that are out there? Like if we take a peek under the hood, like how should people think about this in its new form?
Yeah, I say that like, for most DEX aggregators, and for what it's worth, there is prior work and there's other like teams that are attempting to do things that like are categorically similar. But like in terms of like the traditional model for a DEX aggregator, what people are doing is just like you have like a single team that is like integrating liquidity sources one by one.
Right. And
in doing that, like you're hoping to get as much liquidity coverage as possible. That was like the kind of traditional DEX aggregator. There's definitely like various experiments, like Caswap and Fusion and stuff that like get into closer territory to what we're doing with UniswapX. But here, rather than like trying to like manually find all the liquidity sources, here we're basically saying anyone can do that. And they're competing against each other, and so it's a marketplace.
It's a little bit more meta than a DEX aggregator. So a DEX aggregator is
that was a name on the there was a Uniswap Meta was one name we considered, but naming things is hard. And I think Meta kind of ruined it.
Meta is now taken. That box has been checked, sadly. So a DEX aggregator provides a singular solution to getting the best liquidity. And that is their solution. And what you're saying is in order to improve that product, the teams behind every DEX aggregator needs to serially, manually, one by one, integrate with liquidity pools and in order to improve their product. And what you're saying is UniswapX is not that. It is actually a place for all of those solutions to compete in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And maybe at this point, complexity around Uniswap is so large that knowing the correct way of producing the best outcome is perhaps impossible, which is why you need to leave it up to the free market.
Yeah, that's definitely it. And there's also like other liquidity sources that can start to be integrated there as well. I'd also add that like signed off-chain order-based auctions are like a really powerful primitive.
Let's dive down into that. So like the current, if I go to Uniswap, I sign a transaction, I broadcast it to Ethereum in 12 to 24 seconds, it gets included in the blockchain. That is the current Uniswap user experience that people are used to. With UniswapX, we have this new thing. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that something that's funny is that actually every order, like you already have an auction happening every transaction, right? Because there's like an auction for block space. But people are like competing to like, there's like, I'd say that like one thing that's interesting is that if you imagine there's like a price curve and then there's a gas price curve. And today, like whether or not your order gets included is based purely on the gas price curve, not the asset price curve. And so like this combines everything. Like you just have the price curve. Like the nice thing is it kind of like combines like the gas and the price into a single thing, which is part of it. But yeah, like users sign off-chain orders. They're broadcast, and they can be broadcast in a variety of ways. And
signing off-chain orders as opposed to signing a transaction.
And people have talked about these for a long time, like meta transactions or sponsored transactions. All of these, it's like a similar category of things, but we're like bundling, the gas auction of it getting included in a block with the price auction of trying to optimize your price at the same time. And so that, there's like a nice efficiency thing there where sometimes, for example, in the past, and definitely things improved a lot with 1159, EIP 1159, but sometimes in the past, for example, like, the gas, like your transaction would wait until like the gas dropped a significant amount to get included, but in that time, the token that you were selling also dropped. And so it would have been better for you to pay more gas sooner, but your transaction has no awareness of like there's no like, and that's where when people talk about like MEV awareness, like if the fee that you're paying has no awareness of the transaction that you're doing, then you're like really not optimizing. And so part of this is around that. There's also just like a gas, like there's like a UX benefit. Like people don't like thinking about gas. When I'm trading, USDC for DAI, I just don't want to think about ETH. And it's confusing, and that's something that confuses users a lot. I think something that maybe makes Uniswap a little bit unique in not totally unique, but like somewhat unique in like how we are able to develop and design things is we just have a lot of users and we hear a lot from them, and some of how we approach solving problems is we're like, okay, like what is holding us back today? Like what are our users struggling with right now? And that's part of what like led to us creating a wallet is our users were struggling with wallet UX, and it's part of what led to some of our design decisions here. It's like, it's just like how do we continue to push things forward.
Mm-hmm. I want to drill down on this off-chain order thing just a little bit more, because I think it's a great microcosm for the solutions being put forth by UniswapX as a whole to begin with. So in Uniswap in its current form, like I said, I sign a transaction, I broadcast that transaction. The gas fee that I pay is hard-coded into that transaction, and that is independent from the trade that I'm making. And so these are two different variables that are not talking to each other and can produce suboptimal results, because maybe, like you said, the token moves against me. In the time that I tried to save $2 of gas, I lost $15 off my trade.
Exactly.
With signing an off-chain order, which is signing a transaction but not broadcasting it and just leaving it for somebody, a filler, a taker to take and fulfill that, they are allowed to combine the computation between optimizing for gas fees and optimizing for the actual swap.
Yeah.
And so they take that complexity and do that computation to produce the best outcome. And because it was left off-chain, it was assigned an off-chain order, some sort of off-chain service provider, some filler who's managing this order routing and all the other complexity, they're able to manage the complexity between the gas and the swap to produce a better outcome for a user. And that's just like one piece of many pieces of combined complexity that allows for a better swapping experience.
For sure. And something I'll add is that that might be like, oh, there's an off-chain service. Like what does that mean for decentralization? But I think it's like worth noting that today, the way it works is it's not actually, there's no magic user signs that goes straight to the chain, right? There's we have mempools, we have block builders, we have
Infura,
we have all of these things in between. And what we're trying to do is say let's optimize what's in between to optimize for the best outcomes for users. Because today, MEV, block builders aren't optimizing to give users the most money; they're optimizing to take the most money for themselves. And often, and actually, funny enough, a lot of that money is going to ETH holders through efficient MEV auctions. So actually, ETH holders are making a lot of that profit. But we, ultimately want to give a lot of that value back to swappers. I know we like ETH, but
we also like UX and value retention by end users.
I'll also mention that I mentioned off-chain orders, signed off-chain orders as a general primitive. I think something that's really powerful with UniswapX is it actually opens up a world for cross-chain swapping as well. So today we're launching today is it depends on when this gets.
Hopefully on Monday.
Yeah, Monday the 17th?
United States time. Yeah,
July 17th, something like that. There's going to be an opt-in beta. People can sign up or people can opt in the UI to start having some small percentage of their orders route through this. We're starting small. We're it's only for certain pairs, for certain trade sizes, et cetera. And it's going to, so that we can continue to give time for more fillers to come into the ecosystem and continue optimizing how we parameterize the system. But starting to that today we'll have a version that's just on mainnet on Ethereum. But in the long run, we can really make this cross-chain, and you can sign orders that are, this method of signed off-chain orders is really powerful and expressive, and allows for really good user experience and efficient cross-chain swapping as well. And so not today, but maybe hopefully later in this year, we'll see cross-chain trading, and that will also be really cool.
I want to try and define the landscape of what Uniswap is now, because we have on-chain on Ethereum and the layer 2s. We have Uniswaps 1 through 4, which are AMMs. And then now we also have UniswapX, which is an order routing protocol. It's another protocol. And so this is a new protocol. This is not an AMM. This is actually something completely new compared to all the Uniswaps 1 through 4. This is not a Uniswap 5. This is something completely different. This is a
parallel and complementary.
Parallel and complementary. The pieces fit really, really well together. But I really want to kind of carve out what the definition is of UniswapX. I'm going to do my best, and you can correct me because I'm only get so far. UniswapX is a protocol, an open-ended protocol for service providers, fillers, trade executors to come and fulfill the best trade according to the parameters of a swapper. So a swapper comes to UniswapX and they say, hey, I want to do something. And UniswapX puts that into a package that fillers can all compete on. And so it's like a protocol. What do protocols do? They bundle things in easy to manage packages of information so that other service providers, fillers, swappers, liquidity providers, whatever in the Ethereum ecosystem can all come and compete on that vector of providing that one swapper the best swap possible. And this is, again, complementary with Uniswaps 1 through 4, but is a completely different protocol, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, you could start to think of like AMMs as ways of creating liquidity, building on top of liquidity as a building block, right? There's like, on-chain integrations, and it's just a really cool, expressive, and efficient on-chain way of providing liquidity. But I'd say that like naive routing solutions through AMMs in the long term are not going to make it. Like you kind of need your routing solutions to be aware of things like MEV, aware of kind of more expressive in user intents. And so you could think of this as like, we already have a routing layer. We already have this thing we call the auto router. We also have this thing we call client-side routing. So we have in our web app today, you can actually toggle between two types of routing. I don't know if you know that, but like there's like client-side, which basically turns off the API entirely and just speaks directly to the chain. And that's like maximally like provable but then we have like to make it like better for users, you kind of need to have smarter routing. And so we have this like smart order router, auto router thing we call. And that is like a little bit faster and it discovers more routes, but there's an API behind it, but it's open source. And so the goal, and I would think of this as like a protocol that lives in that domain, not as a protocol that lives in the like AMM. Right. So like we already have this like the routing side of the system already exists, and we're just kind of like updating it with a new protocol. And I'll also mention that like the UniswapX does have like there's like on-chain smart contracts that settle orders. They're immutable, actually open source, real GPL open source, and then there's and then you have like front ends that broadcast orders, fillers that have to like discover those broadcasted orders, and then the fillers basically can submit them directly to the smart contracts.
So I think what UniswapX is really doing is they're enabling a new type of player in the Uniswap arena. So we have swappers already. Most people listening to this are swappers. Some people listening to this might be liquidity providers, and they are providing liquidity into the AMM. So we have the AMMs, which are the Uniswaps 1 through 4. We have the liquidity providers. We have the swappers, the traders who trade on Uniswap. But now UniswapX is enabling this new type of player called a filler.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that like they're not new. We're just have a routing system that is aware of them.
Right. You're formalizing them.
We're formalizing them in a way that can put constraints on them, because right now what they do is, you can think of them as today as like the people that do like, the most advanced trading strategies, the people that do a lot of the arbitrage, the block builders, the MEV extractors, right? And what we're trying to do is like put constraints on them and take value that would go to them and give them back to the swappers. So the players exist. We're just formalizing them, and we're having them compete with each other in a way that tries to drive as much value back to swappers as possible.
So swappers, the people who trade on Uniswap just to trade tokens, meme tokens, USDC, Ether, are now going to be pointed towards UniswapX. So to trade on Uniswap now in the future, and now with UniswapX, means to be trading through UniswapX, correct?
Well, first, like there is like the routing system we're going to build is like going to direct your order wherever it thinks it will get you the best price. And so especially at launch with the beta, like a lot of orders will just route through our existing routing system. I'd say that like over time, probably more volume will go through UniswapX, but I think that over time also most UniswapX volume will go through Uniswap, the AMM protocol.
Right. So UniswapX, people will trade on Uniswap. They can use UniswapX, and then UniswapX, as in its nascent time, will just say, oh, what's most efficient? The Uniswap order router.
Yeah.
But as it develops and grows and matures, it might find a better pricing and better just sources over time.
Yeah. And but for what it's worth, like that sort of already like we're already in that world, which is like today, like if you don't get best prices going through Uniswap, then people will go somewhere else. And so like there's always like other liquidity. Like I think that like the goal of the Uniswap, the AMM, is to have like the best liquidity and the most assets possible. And I think that Uniswap v4 is like a really, really powerful way of achieving that. And I'd say that it's so funny. The one thing that's like really interesting is when I was developing Uniswap v1, way back in the day, there was like the framing, the mental framework was like, do AMMs have a place in this world? The frame wasn't like, was like, I'm going to build the best AMM that's going to take over all the liquidity. It was like like this is like a new way to do like liquidity creation. And like I wonder if it will like work and like have a place in the world. And I think we saw that it does, and it's like a really efficient, cool way of creating liquidity and unlocks some really powerful new things. Like the ability for anyone to create, liquidity at like sort of any, like it's sort of, anyone can create liquidity. Not anyone can create liquidity as efficiently or effectively as Citadel, but anyone can do it at some level, right? And that's why a lot of the earliest, pools that were big on Uniswap were like these like longer tail pools that were struggling to get exchange listings, et cetera. And like MKR and DAI were like very big in the early days because they were like, it was like the only place to trade them. And so like AMMs are like have these like new unlocks. They're like, oh, like anyone can provide liquidity. It also has like on-chain integrations, which are like a really like money Legos. It's like a really big unlock. I think that like, in the like when I think about decentralized finance and like what we're trying to achieve, right? Like we can't just kind of like iterate in our like small world. Like we have to like kind of innovate and push beyond it. And I'd say that like I think that like AMMs are like going to be like, I'm extremely bullish AMMs as like a market structure, but I think that there are also other market structures that like could, exist in the future. And then I think we also want to discover them and have them be part of the Uniswap ecosystem, and have them be like complementary. And so like you could think of this as like, oh, some volume might go, elsewhere, but like that volume might go elsewhere anyway, because if Uniswap isn't offering the best prices. And so I'd say that like, other liquidity sources are going to exist whether or not we are aware of them and look for them. And so, also worth mentioning that like today, Uniswap has like a pretty, like, it's the funny thing is that we've actually seen this play out in aggregators. Like Uniswap still is like the largest liquidity source for every aggregator that's out there, even though they all have like private market makers, other liquidity sources. And I think that like the sort of network effects that can build up around V4 will also be like really helpful.
So what you're saying with all of that is that UniswapX is not a Uniswap maximalist protocol.
Well, it has the word Uniswap. I'd say that like it's not
a Uniswap.
I'd say that like I don't want to go that far. Like I'm pretty AMM maxi in many ways, but I'd say that like it's like expressive and starts to push the Uniswap ecosystem to go beyond strictly AMMs. But I'd say that like it still is like also the best way to route across AMMs, which is I think really important. Like you could like for anything that is like lost to other liquidity sources, there's like also gains I think in like routing efficiency, and also really importantly when you start to think around like when we jump back to like that hooks problem, like one of the biggest questions that we got after the sort of announcement of our vision for Uniswap V4 was like, okay, I'm a team, I create a hook, and how do I make sure that people like, front end, like one of the nice things about Uniswap is if I create a pool, I know that like routing is gonna be discovered in like routing engines. Like if I create a new hook that has some new like, like let's say it has like TWAM in it. TWAM, if you're routing through a TWAM pool, you need to be aware of like the TWAM component because that affects the price you get, and you can't just look at the liquidity. Or if I create some other custom hook, like how do I know that my, maybe people are afraid that it will like, it's not safe and they have to audit it and it takes some time to audit and they don't care about me. And so like, how does my liquidity get discovered? And this is like the solution to that, right? It's like if someone creates a new custom pool, a new custom hook, rather than needing like Uniswap Labs team to audit their hook and integrate it into our front end, which is like, not the like it's not the ideal process, right? And like let's say like maybe we're going to be in a world where there's a million hooks, or a million like right now we already have hundreds of thousands of pools. We're going to be in a world that has like millions, probably eventually hundreds of millions of pools, and you can't like have a single kind of team just does routing. And so like you can think of this as like now all you need is to find one filler who's willing to integrate your hook. And then that hook is like represented in the liquidity that you find in front ends, like the Uniswap front end. So when you go, so someone can like not only create their liquidity pool on Uniswap, they can like find one of any filler in the world or create that's willing to like include that hook, and then from day immediately that liquidity is represented in the Uniswap UI. And so I think that like you could think of it as like adversarial, but I kind of think of it as like almost like strictly required to like make it work in the long run. And so, yeah, pretty excited.
MetaMask has something new. Introducing MetaMask Portfolio. MetaMask Portfolio is the best way to view your crypto portfolio from a holistic level. See everything across all the chains all at once. In your portfolio, MetaMask will report the aggregate value of all the assets in your MetaMask wallets, and even the other wallets you import too. But MetaMask Portfolio isn't just a passive portfolio viewer, it is a place to do all of the money verbs that make DeFi so powerful. You can buy, swap, bridge, and stake your crypto assets. So not only is MetaMask the easiest place to see your wallets in aggregate, but it's also a powerful battle station for all of your DeFi moves. So go check out your MetaMask portfolio, because it's waiting for you to open it up. Check it out at portfolio.metamask.io. ARBITRUM is accelerating the Web3 landscape with a suite of secure Ethereum scaling solutions. Hundreds of projects have already deployed onto ARBITRUM 1, with a flourishing DeFi and NFT ecosystem. ARBITRUM Nova is quickly becoming a Web3 gaming hub, and social dApps like Reddit are also calling ARBITRUM home. And now, ARBITRUM Orbit allows you to use ARBITRUM's secure scaling technology to build your own Layer 3, giving you access to interoperable, customizable permissions with dedicated throughput. All of these technologies leverage the security and decentralization of Ethereum and provide a builder experience that's intuitive, familiar, and fully EVM compatible. Faster transaction speeds and significantly lower gas fees. Are you a dev but you don't know Solidity? With Stylus, ARBITRUM's upcoming proposal for a programming environment upgrade, developers can write smart contracts in Rust, C, C++, and many more coding languages. ARBITRUM empowers you to explore and build without compromise. Visit arbitrum.io, where you can join the community, dive into the developer docs, bridge your assets, and start building your first app on ARBITRUM. MANTLE, formerly known as BitDAO, is the first DAO-led Web3 ecosystem, all built on top of Mantle's first core product, the Mantle Network, a brand new high-performance Ethereum Layer 2 built using the OP stack, but uses EigenLayer's data availability solution instead of the expensive Ethereum Layer 1. Not only does this reduce Mantle Network's gas fees by 80%, but it also reduces gas fee volatility, providing a more stable foundation for Mantle's applications. The Mantle Treasury is one of the biggest DAO-owned treasuries, which is seeding an ecosystem of projects from all around the Web3 space for Mantle. Mantle already has sub-communities from around Web3 onboarded, like Game7 for Web3 gaming, and Bybit for TVL and liquidity and on-ramps. So if you want to build on the Mantle network, Mantle is offering a grants program that provides milestone-based funding to promising projects that help expand, secure, and decentralize Mantle. If you want to get started working with the first DAO-led Layer 2 ecosystem, check out Mantle at mantle.xyz and follow them on Twitter at 0xmantle. I think this is just overall a really good, elegant lesson as to how markets harness complexity really, really well. There's be no way where one single player could manage all of this complexity with all these different pools in versus the competition of just like, oh, this is too complex, just make the market deal with it. I want to run through how UniswapX actually works. I mean, we've talked a lot about the contours of it, but maybe we can run through the life cycle of a transaction and how UniswapX actually ensures that that transaction gets the best actual output of whatever it's trying to do possible. So like maybe you can run us through UniswapX under the hood.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we can start with like the Uniswap front end. For swappers in the Uniswap front end, it actually looks and feels very, very similar.
Okay.
No
new skills are required here? No
new skills, hopefully fewer skills in the long run. But, when you go to you choose the tokens you want to trade, you you click like swap. The first difference is actually that you'll see that there's no gas for your swap. Mm-hmm. There is still, I'll caveat that like, there is still like one initial approved per token of like the permit contract. Okay. We created these permit contracts that you've probably seen mm-hmm. that'll like basically allow any signature to do signature. Any token that you approve on this contract can now do signature-based approvals forever for you. Mm. So that's like what permit is, and this is building on top of that. So you do have to do an approved transaction every once in a while for mm-hmm. new tokens that you haven't traded, and that does cost gas. And there's no way to avoid that unless the token itself includes gasless signatures or you're using a smart contract wallet. But for tokens that do have, signature-based approvals eventually, but anyway, like once we have our token approvals, mm-hmm. Which is our, from that point on, right, you make a swap, and instead of paying gas, and instead of signing a transaction, if you're using MetaMask, it looks a little different. Uniswap wallet looks than a regular transaction. It just says, you're trying to sign you're just like signing a signature. Mm-hmm. So you sign a signature, and then at that moment, it feels very similar. It then goes to a pending transaction state mm-hmm. for the user. One noticeable difference is that when you sign a transaction, you can immediately go to EtherScan and start like waiting for it. Mm-hmm. here it's just an off-chain signature. So the order hasn't been executed. We don't know what the transaction hash will be yet.
Right.
At this point,
it's not even in the mempool.
Yeah.
It's in the pre-mem pool.
Yeah. At this point, the order is broadcast to like a network of fillers from the front end, and there's like a kind of like a there's an API for that, and then it's similar to like our auto routers. There's an API, and so the order is broadcast to a network of fillers. And I'm going to start with the base case and then mention that there's like an optimal, there's an additional like ability to parameterize through RFQ. But just like the base case of a GUDA order is you sign an off-chain order, it's broadcast. Your order is basically like a decaying price auction. So like at the moment you sign it, you're like willing to accept 100, like one price, and then like the price goes down a little bit over time. And what
Until it gets filled.
Yeah, and so you start at like maybe it starts at a little bit above the price you expect, and then it decays over time.
Right.
And what that does is the moment that it's worth it for someone to fill, they will, and so that's like what creates a competition.
Right. And that's what in theory produces the best possible outcome, because so long as some rational actor is saying, hey, that's profitable, I'll do that, you'll get the first profitable actor that'll do that.
Yeah, the person who's willing to take the lowest margin or has like the best strategy. And they're competing against other people, and they want to make sure they get it, so they try to give the best price. Then at that moment, the filler, not you, submits the transaction, meaning they're paying the gas. And then what that does is it pulls your tokens out of your wallet. You've approved it. And there's a smart contract that you fill through, and it enforces that they can only take the tokens out of your wallet if they send you the required amount of tokens based on the moment at which it executes, right? Because there's like a timestamp component. And that's about it, right? You sign an order, a filler, the first filler that's willing to fill it takes it and submits it on chain and pays the gas, and that does the transaction. I think that something that starts to happen here is as you think about like latency. So back in the day, pre-1159, Uniswap transactions used to take like a few minutes sometimes. People were like, the gas markets weren't very good or very efficient. Right. Today it's a little bit faster. About 75% of Uniswap trades execute in the first block. After they sign it, and about 90% in the second block by the end of the second block, so I think that there's like definitely a need for the auctions to happen very quickly, and so there's an optional component for this system, like optional at a smart contract level, right? UIs can do whatever, but that allows you to like layer an RFQ on top of it. Which basically means you use an RFQ system, right? Request for quote, they're called, where you ask a bunch of people, what is the best price you'll give me? And you use that to inform what the actual market price is, rather than like guessing when you're parameterizing the auction. To incentivize people to like give you their best quotes, you do have to like give them something sort of in return. And so the way that looks in the smart contracts is if you use the optional RFQ parameterization, then then basically there's like a slight priority given to the RFQ winner for the first maybe few blocks. So what it looks like is like I sign my order, if I'm doing a transaction with an RFQ, I ask the best quote. I sign an order that says this person can fill at their quote. Anyone can fill if they have real price improvement. They can fill and they can come in before them. But there's like some margin of price improvement that they have to offer. So you can't offer like one way higher. Right. It's like you have to offer like, maybe 0.5% higher, something like that. So there's still a public auction component where someone can come in with price improvement and outcompete the RFQ winner, which is important. But there is like for a few blocks, a slight priority given to RFQ winner, which allows you to basically get, very efficient, very fast price discovery. And in that way, maybe most transactions that fill through that include the RFQ can execute maybe in like 1 to 2 blocks, as opposed to if you weren't using the RFQ, maybe it would take like 5 to 10 blocks or something like that.
With this model, this decreasing price auction, which is a Dutch auction, which has existed from the 1700s, which is why we know it's really good primitive.
Do you know where it comes from?
The Dutch?
Yes, but do you know it's from tulip auctions?
Whenever I hear Dutch, I'm like, was it the tulips?
Yeah, it was the tulips.
It was the tulips.
Yeah, it was flower auctions.
We'll put a pin in that one. First tulips, now dogs. You have the option of extending the time and or slowing down the decreasing price for a very long time. Yeah. Like, you could go up to 10 blocks, or you could go up to 10 days for whoever wants to do that for whatever reason. What would be the advantage for extending that period of time? Like, why would someone do that?
Yeah, I'd say that, you can. So one thing is if you don't want to like depend on this this RFQ system, or if the RFQ system is not like optimal for whatever reason for your trade, some people might just be comfortable having like part of it is like there's sort of an assumption in what I'm saying that users need their transaction to execute in the same 1 to 2 blocks, and I think a lot of users that's really important, and it's like a reason that that's when we build things at Uniswap we have to be able to consider what our users care about, and so. Having this like RFQ component allows it for users who want their trade to execute in like the next block. It allows that. But if users are like comfortable waiting like a minute or two, you might have there's definitely there's a lot of debates you could get into about whether or not it's like there's price improvement. It probably depends on like the size of the order. All right, if you're making like a large order, giving some people time to like source liquidity can optimize the price. So waiting a little bit longer, giving more time for it to propagate, more people to discover it, etc. There is risk that the price moves that the price moves against you during that time, and not like this sort of like you are like if you have an order that executes more slowly, there is risk that you are taking on like price risk that like maybe the trade will like go down, the price will go down, not up for the token you're selling, and so it's not like strictly better, but it is it does let you like remove the RFQ system, and it also I'd say that like. Waiting 1 to 2 minutes, like you're not really expecting too much price movement, and it might actually like optimize price a little bit. But I don't want to like, it's like such a kind of a interesting design and trade-off space that it's like, I'd also mention that, one reason that might actually be is that like batching within the system, like if you have orders that execute slowly, maybe someone else makes an order in another direction within that time, and then it's more efficient to net against them. Something that like maybe people ever know is like the story, not everyone, but most people know the story of like Carl and my first friend in the space, and he gets me into AMMs. I don't know if you know the second person I met. The first 3 people in order that I met in the space were Carl, then Phil Dyan, then Dan Robinson. That's a
pretty good lineup.
Good lineup. So the second person I met in this space was Phil, and the founder, co-founder of Flashbots, and like MEV, inventor of the term MEV, I believe.
Discoverer of MEV.
And he released like the Flash Boys 2.0 paper, and so we've been talking about this like design space since like well before, and like the first kind of version of Uniswap, right, is like, this leaks MEV kind of. I mean, we didn't have the word MEV yet, but and he sent me a paper by this guy Eric Budish called like it was something like frequent batch auctions, something trading arms race, frequent batch, like basically gets into like the whole like Flash Boys 2.0, and like basically like postulates that like if time is continuous, like if you treat time as like a continuous thing, then like these like HFT games are like inevitable.
Right.
That like there's always people, they're like front running is like inevitable if like time happens in order. Right. And that like to like create fairer systems that don't favor like an arms race, you kind of have to like break time up into discrete intervals and do batching within those intervals. And so there's sort of like and definitely like there were like have been earlier attempts at it in Ethereum, but I think there's like often like UX issues around it. So I think what we're partially trying to do is like experiment with and explore this like this trade-off space of like how do we like create fairer outcomes that don't have this maximized power in the most sophisticated traders in the world purely. And I think part of that is like starting to like enable things to be executed in batch and starting to be like more aware of things like MEV and so. I don't even remember what question you asked at this point. I'm kind of just ranting, but
we were going through how the life cycle of a token, and then also just the time for why someone would extend out a long period of blocks.
All that to say, like users have their preferences for like how their order, like if someone really cares about executing their order immediately, they probably are going to get a slightly less optimized trade because they have to kind of like rely on like you can't very efficiently discover auctions allow you to like efficiently discover the right price, but the slower if the auction is too fast, it's not very efficient. Right. It's hard. You have to like know how to parameterize your auction, and you don't know how to and so like the faster you need it to converge, like the less, in some ways, there's like less time for optimization. And so like having slower orders over time, like might just let you like get more optimal prices where you feel better about like there not being someone who's like extracting some value from your transaction. If you don't care and you just want your order to happen right now, you know, like then like you're always gonna then like things like we can do much better than today, but like there's going to be some trade-off space of like, if you want the instant fastest transaction, you might have to pay a little bit more in the long run than people who have slower transactions.
Right. What about MEV? How is MEV as a mechanism, how has UniswapX stopped the leakage of MEV?
Yeah, I'd say that like I don't want to use phrases like stop the leakage of MEV because there's like there's even like different ways of like thinking about it. Some people say like, oh, MEV exists no matter what. It's just like you've internalized it, or some people, or it's like gone to a different party. It existed. You just, if you generally think about it as like, someone wants to make a trade, that creates some value somewhere, and like, like there's a lot of forms of MEV, right? People have talked about like sandwiching, front running, back running, reordering transactions, reorgs. I don't even remember time bandit attacks.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question.
I'll give an actual answer. Right?
How has UniswapX changed the way MEV is expressed?
No, I think that like generally what we're trying to do is have value that today leaks out to block builders and validators through MEV markets, right? Right now, when someone makes a trade, like it is actually also broadcast publicly. It's like right now, basically, someone makes a trade on Uniswap, like people are just like competing with each other, but they're not competing with each other to offer the best price to the Uniswap user. They're competing with each other to extract the most value from the Uniswap user. That's what current MEV markets are, and that's what current like block building networks are. And what we're trying to say is like, can we change how we encode transactions such that competition rather than like a bunch of sophisticated people competing to like extract value from swappers, like they're competing with each other, and as much of that value as humanly possible. Like some of it, some value will always have to go to Ethereum miners or validators. Some value will always go to like block builders. But like, how do we just maximize the percentage of the MEV that goes back to the swapper because they're competing with each other, right? Like if they're competing right now, they are competing with each other, but they're competing with each other to take all of the money. Now we want them to compete with each other to like have most of that value go back to the swapper. So it just has to do with how you like encode your transactions, and having like an auction is a way of doing that, because if there today like a Uniswap order is like executing at like basically like a it says like I will make this trade as long as I get better than the minimum slippage, my slippage tolerance. And what that means is like a validator can like front run the order up to the slippage tolerance and take that money for free if you're mining a block. And we don't want that, and so by having like a price decay over time, as soon as it's as soon as it's profitable for someone to include that transaction, they will. And so I guess one way to put it is that like today, like depending on the size of the trade, like it can be profitable to like front run up to your slippage tolerance. In this one, it doesn't go to the minimum price because it usually your slippage tolerance is still expressed as like the minimum price of the auction, but the order is filled well before it hits your minimum price, and it can't hit your minimum price until the end of the auction, by which time it's already been profitable. So the first moment it's profitable, that's when it's filled. And so you don't like just get like front run up to your slippage tolerance, which is kind of how it works. Right.
This is the beauty of the mechanism design of a Dutch auction, where just the mere system itself of making sure somebody fills that order at the first profitable opportunity is the MEV protection mechanism.
Yeah. I'd say that like also like, so that's like the mechanism of protection. I'd say there's like other ways that like it's improved, and like things like just the fact that like if you have a bunch of transactions at once that are off-chain orders, like one filler can like discover all of them and complete them all at the same time. And that means that like it can be, that means it can be profitable to fill them all even earlier in their life cycle, because like someone might have an order and on its own it's not profitable for the filler to include it in a block or like a block builder. But like if you have another order that's going the other direction, then maybe you can. And so like when you think about that as like the earlier up you are, like the higher up you are in your Dutch auction, like it's a decaying price. The higher up you are, the less value has been leaked. And so we're trying to like, the more optimal, that we can like make these filler networks, and the better we can parameterize these orders, like the less value will be leaked.
Okay. Are we ready for the bridge conversation?
Cross-chain
swapping?
Yes, cross-chain swapping.
How do I enter this conversation?
Yeah.
What's the point of entry here?
I can start. And basically, when you have orders expressed as off-chain signatures, we initially like started this project kind of thinking about what we might want to do in the aggregation space. And I think that what we discovered in the process is like, if you express your orders as off-chain signatures, there are like other things you can do. And I think one thing we discovered is that you can actually do very efficient, very powerful, good UX cross-chain swapping. And so instead of signing an order that says I want to swap this token for this token on Ethereum, you could sign an order that says I want to swap this token on Optimism for this token on Arbitrum, or this swapping across chains. And the sort of beauty of it is that from a swapper's perspective, the user experience is exactly the same. And even like the UX of it actually can fill very quickly. And these fillers that are filling orders on Uniswap that we've already talked about, they actually can handle like the complexity and latency of using bridges and figuring out settlement. And so we basically think that like the cross-chain version of this is really powerful. I guess one way to put it is that maybe a few of the benefits that you might see is, one, it allows for like native asset swaps. So like right now, a lot of value currently lives in like when people are doing like moving funds between chains and making trades across them. Usually what you're doing is like you're bridging an asset, then you have a bridged representation of that asset on another chain that is like sitting in a passive in like a liquidity pool. And then you're swapping in that liquidity, like you might like bridge ETH to, maybe to be more concrete, like you might bridge ETH to Polygon and then swap your Polygon ETH to Matic tokens on Polygon. I guess they rebranded their token.
Soon, yeah.
Something like that.
With approval, yeah.
Something like that. But in that world, bridges are like, I mean, look, we've looked at this world of bridge. Like we've had so many bridge hacks. Funds that passively sit in bridges are just like, risk for the industry more or less. And look, the more, obviously like some bridges are much better than others. And like we've had like these L2 bridges have held up pretty well so far for the most part. But what you can do with UniswapX is you could just say, I'm going to swap ETH on mainnet for Matic on Polygon, and a filler, basically, should I talk to the life cycle maybe? Maybe that would help.
Sure, yeah.
But like, so like a swapper might sign an order that says like, I want to swap ETH on mainnet for Matic on Polygon, and a filler, and then it just like the previous version, like you have like this decaying price auction for how much Matic you need to fill to get the input ETH, and the order is actually completed on the input chain as well. So the filler, as soon as there's a price at which they're willing to fill, they they initiate a transaction that like claims the order, and they transfers the user's input tokens into a kind of like an escrow contract, and they put up a little bond. And now, they're basically responsible for sending you those tokens on the output chain. And so the next thing that the filler does is they send you those tokens on the output chain. And now the filler, from the swapper's perspective, they like have just like made a cross-chain swap. And then the filler basically has to like prove that they did that to claim the user's input tokens on the input chain. And if they don't do the proof, eventually it would go back to the swapper because they never proved that they filled. Now, how do you do a proof? You can use any possible bridge. Right. So that's one of the really cool things about it, is that like UniswapX cross-chain variant basically can support any possible bridge messaging, or like any cross-chain messaging protocol, or even like any other system for how you settle these cross-chain orders. It's like kind of completely agnostic to that. But we have some initial smart contracts, which I think will probably be going open source around the same time as that basically allow you to that work for like the canonical Optimism, Arbitrum, and Polygon bridges. But yeah, basically like the filler has to prove through a bridge, or they could do it optimistically. Like one way to do it is like it's assumed the filler fills unless someone challenges it, and then it kicks off the force to do it through a bridge. It's like a similar design space to like optimistic rollups or something, where like but that shouldn't happen in most cases, like because you have bonds to prevent that. But generally speaking, maybe user signs off-chain order that is an auction. Filler, initiates a transaction that puts their tokens into the escrow contract, then fills in the output chain and does a proof. And that proof can be an optimistic proof, which means that like it's assumed that they do it unless it's proven that they don't. And then in that way, you have like very fast, good UX cross-chain swaps. And like definitely, if you go to a challenge period, then it might be like if you challenge a swap where you need to prove it through like the Optimism or Arbitrum bridges, which are 7 days, then you have a 7-day lockup period of the input assets. but that only happens if a filler lies and then they lose their bond. And so you have to like parameterize these bonds to be such that it's not not optimal to fade.
To carry this through with one of the themes I established at the beginning, which we talked about with all Uniswap v4 and 1 through 4, there's all these pools and all this complexity. And so this beautiful, elegant mechanism of an off-chain signed order, an off-chain order, that doesn't just solve the complexity problem of pools, it also solves the complexity problem of bridges. And bridges and pools are kind of similar in that regard. And so since we are just signing these transactions, signing these messages of these off-chain orders that say, I have this token and I would like this other token on this other chain, all of that gets abstracted by the same service providers, the same fillers. And so they can manage the bridge complexity. They can manage the timing and the latency of that, and just provide the swapper the thing that they want, which is the maximum number of tokens in the place that they want it.
Yeah.
And all of that complexity is just, once again, the whole theme of this seems to be left up to the free market, left up to the fillers.
Yeah, and there's like smart contracts on the like the input chain that like enforce that the swapper actually gets what they wanted, right? Because you do have to choose like what is your source of truth for whether or not the order was filled. Mm-hmm. And that's specified in the order as it's being broadcast. And so like it's likely that like in our UI, once we have this live in our UI, like you'll probably use like mostly canonical bridges. So like, for swaps between Optimism and mainnet, maybe we'll use the Optimism bridge. And, you can use the optimistic pattern to make it so that like, you don't actually have to have 7-day, delays. And I'll also mention like one thing that's kind of cool is that it's not just for like you can think of it as like also like for like fast L2 exits, you can use this, right? Some people might be willing to like pay you. If you have ETH on mainnet and want ETH on Optimism, someone who's on Optimism who wants to exit might be willing to pay you a little bit to do that, right? And so you can use this for fast exits as well. I'd say that like definitely the like reduced amount of one thing that's like a little bit different is from like most existing kind of like bridging protocols is most bridging protocols have passive exposure to bridge risk.
Passive exposure to bridge risk. What is that?
So like if basically like liquidity providers in them are like you hear about like bridge hacks, like basically like that like
we do.
Yeah, like you hear about bridge hacks all the time. I think there was a $1 billion one like last week or something.
Last week?
I thought so, maybe not.
I've been gone for 10 days. This is the first thing I've done in crypto in the last 10 days.
Well,
so I have some catching up to do.
Well, I don't know if we know how much. I think it was like minimum. I don't know. It was like, anyway, we don't need to get into specific.
Okay.
But yeah, like, bridge hacks are a thing. And it's because people are like they're holding, you deposit a token on one chain and it has and then at that point the bridge is kind of like almost like a multi-sig holding all those tokens, and they have representations of those tokens on other chains. And the sort of like risk and for as long as those tokens live on the other chain in any form, and if you want to have like liquidity for people to like make trades, then like liquidity providers need to hold those like bridged representations of tokens on the other chains. And so like ETH on another chain is always going to be worse than ETH on mainnet. And there's maybe one exception, like USDC on any chain is probably like equally the same, which is kind of interesting, and that's why it's interesting that they have a bridge. And by the way, we did do an experiment that made it so that we could use the Circle USDC bridge as a settlement system for the cross-chain variant of UniswapX. But that's sort of an aside. But it again speaks to like you can like basically have like I think we're gonna eventually have a world where like most assets live on the chain in which they were originated or like whatever chain that they're like most secure or is like most canonical for that asset. There might be some assets that are like on multiple chains, like things that are common stores of value and like currencies. So like top stable coins and maybe ETH and a few others. But like but generally speaking, like allowing, if you're a liquidity provider, just letting you kind of like hold most of your, like let's say that like, I want to fill and like I could have like some native tokens on each chain. And like if I want to fill an order, like let's say I do a cross-chain swap from some random native asset to Optimism from mainnet. Like even if you don't have like there might be AMMs on Optimism that are between like, the Optimism native tokens and other Optimism native tokens, and on mainnet between mainnet native tokens. And so like the filler, they can basically just like, maybe they have like, they're holding OP tokens on Optimism. They buy some other Optimism native token, fill your order on and fill your order on Optimism. And then they like and then like they just like receive ETH on mainnet. And they never at any moment in time had to have like like they never had to hold like ETH wrapped on Optimism, or it just like reduces the amount of like the size of these bridge honeypots and lets people just like swap between native assets
Well, it seems to really minimize the use of bridges in the first place. Like, rather than have bridges being bridges for assets, bridges are, in this model, are simply just used to pass the final message, data, not assets, of approval that the bridge was actually, the trade, the swap was actually executed appropriately.
Right.
And so it's one small use of a bridge to pass a small packet of data rather than having hosting long-term liquidity inside of these bridges.
And you don't even need that data packet unless the swap, like the filler is lying.
Right.
Like if the filler like actually fills your order, you don't even need to pass that data.
Is it fair to call it minimum viable bridging?
Yeah, we're basically like trying to minimize the amount of like assets only live in bridges. You know, like there are assets like users are only exposed to bridge risk while transactions are in flight. Once like like the swapper has once the swapper has the output tokens and the filler has the input tokens, there's like no more bridge risk for either party, unless those tokens happen to be like wrapped bridged assets, but they don't need to be. So yeah, we're like minimizing the extent to which people need bridges. We're also kind of like abstracting them away a little bit. Like this system can kind of support any possible bridge. You could think of it as a bridge aggregator. It's important to like note that like the bridge used for settlement is like different from like fillers can use any bridge they want to like move liquidity around. They could use centralized exchanges, they could use bridges, whatever. But then like each trade does have a specific bridge or what we use the term settlement oracle.
Right.
Which can be any bridge. It could also technically be any other system. You could technically use like a multi-sig or a governance system or a single party if you wanted. If you wanted to, you could also trust the filler. If you like are like, I trust the filler, and then like you could trust them to be, and they could be and then you say anything that they say happen. Like technically you could do whatever you want.
Right. You just need some system to say that yes, trade, that swap was fulfilled.
And this protocol is like completely agnostic to that system. It like can support any possible system. We have like initial smart contract designs that like work with like as I mentioned, like the mainnet to like the canonical L2 bridges for Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon. We have a design that works with like the Circle bridge. But it can really work with all of every bridge you hear about in the space. Like theoretically, you could have like an adapter that could use that bridge. And then bridges are competing on like offering security and latency for like passing messages, and not like having like billions of dollars of liquidity stored in them passively, which is like which is like a security risk. And we've seen how that plays out.
Again, the theme of this whole thing seems to be harnessing complexity, and UniswapX. The naming also, I think, is intuitive because we have Uniswaps 1 through 4, right, which are AMMs. And again, UniswapX is not an AMM. It is a order router, an order optimizer. And so we have all of this expressive liquidity protocols that we call AMMs, Uniswaps 1 through 4. And then we have this other expressive order fulfillment service called UniswapX. It really kind of seems to be like a yin and a yang, like two sides of the same coin, where if you smash these things together, now you have Uniswap. That is Uniswap, right?
Right. Yeah, I'd say that like this is definitely like a moment, and it's not the first moment, but it is a moment where like Uniswap as an ecosystem can like step slightly beyond what it's done, and and kind of continue pushing into new territory. But like definitely
new
like
frontiers, please.
New frontiers. Yeah. I'd say that like definitely the end goal, right, is we want to create like decentralized markets, and we want today, right, people use decentralized markets because they are decentralized, but they don't. But there's like a trade-off, right? Like the user experience is still a little bit worse. Like it's still not as efficient. There's still not as much liquidity. It's still like you kind of like people use it like despite the flaw. But we think that like in the long run, like decentralized markets can actually be like more powerful and stronger and like have better user experience and more efficient market structures. Right, like we speak to like even like when you think about like a markets-based approach to something versus like a single company that's trying to like optimize for you, right? Like moving into these models, we just think that like and using also like all these like new tricks that we've learned in blockchains and with crypto, new novel cryptography, and eventually we'll have like better ZK tech, and like that's going to be a part of the story. Like this is like a first step. That's a really important thing I want to get across. Like building, like we want to build like the ultimate kind of like decentralized kind of order flow network, and there's like a broader industry around us that is also working on these problems. We want to do it like collaboratively, right? Like teams like like Flashbots, et cetera. Like there's like all these other teams that are also working towards like how do we like decentralize order flow, and this is like part of that story. But I think it's a really big moment for the industry because Uniswap is in part because like of how dominant Uniswap is from a in terms of like volume and users, right? Like something like probably like 30+% of all gas on Ethereum is Uniswap trades, and I guarantee it's a higher percentage of MEV,
right.
because Uniswap trades generate more MEV than transfers, and so it might and so like having I think that like Uniswap, like us kind of stepping into space, is like really important for kind of helping push the industry forward, and also like having users and like being able to like learn from them and kind of optimize and improve, for real people that are really transacting, like is like really useful and important. And again, we're like really excited to do it collaboratively, and like if these other kind of like models also end up working out, like things like Suave, like could like be directly tied into things like UniswapX. Like they're not like also automatically competitive. We're all kind of like working towards like decentralized order flow generally.
Mm-hmm. So what's the rollout plan for UniswapX? How does it get started today, Monday the 17th?
Yes, today, Monday the 17th.
It's actually Sunday, but for us, but for you guys who are hearing this on Monday, what's the rollout plan? How does this actually launch?
Yeah, so today what we have is the single chain mainnet variant is in like an early kind of opt-in beta stage, meaning that when you make a when you go to the Uniswap web app, you can go into settings and you can turn it on. You can also just like make transactions, and if there's a transaction that the interface thinks you will get a better price if you use UniswapX, or if not a better price, like it's like, and I think again it's like this is like the first, like it's sort of like an early beta, and so it's like it will suggest it to you and you can turn it on. Even once you've turned it on, it doesn't mean 100% of trades will route through it. It's actually going to be like probably like a smaller percentage of trades, only like certain tokens, only certain trade sizes, only certain pairs, only certain this is again like the earliest beta rollout. We want to really like test the system before we roll it out to like a full user base, and for like all orders. And so today what we have is a working system for the mainnet version, and the ability to opt in and have some percentage of your trades execute through it. When you do, you will see that your orders now no longer cost gas. There's some minor UX tweaks that show like this order that there's like no gas being paid. It will be a signature instead of a transaction. When the transaction is pending, you can't go to EtherScan because the transaction hash hasn't been created because it's just an off-chain signature. So there's like a few things. It's kind of like a slow rollout. We really this is like a big moment and a big change in a complex protocol, and we want to like optimize parameterization. We want to give time for a competitive marketplace only exists once people join it,
actually participate.
And so we have like some done a little bit of work to onboard some initial kind of fillers to help like test the system, but like we really want to give time for more people to onboard and interact before it becomes like the full thing. And so this is like an early version. And now in terms of like the cross-chain variant, unclear. We have smart contracts right now, like stuff like parameterization, how long it will take fillers to start to integrate cross-chain. They're still probably going to have to wrap their head around the single chain variant, and that will take some time, as well as like the front-end considerations of cross-chain trading. There's like some other changes that probably need to be made to like let you swap between different chains, like in terms of how we handle network connection and other things. So we're starting to like work on improvements in our web app today that like make it more multi-chain native. If you look at our wallet is very like handles multi-chain very cleanly, and our web app is like not quite there. And so like as we're like optimizing the single chain variant, we're going to start like optimizing our web app to be better for multi-chain generally. And then hopefully like later this year, we have the cross-chain variant in our web app as well, and people will be able to make trades. But yeah.
What service providers or what other people, infrastructure is needed in order to actually get this thing up and rolling? Like who do you need to hear from? Who do you need to get onboarded?
Yeah, I'd say that like a lot of it already is like swappers just need to use the web app as normal. Liquidity providers just need to create liquidity in the Uniswap protocol as normal. I'd say that like what's new is there are definitely fillers, and there's sort of initially like there's initially just like an API that broadcasts orders, and so integrating that and being able to like fill orders, there's already like all these like people that do block building that can start tapping into that. So we need fillers to start discovering orders. Also, for the RFQ variant, definitely there's a need of like people who provide quotes up front. That's about it. I'd say that like probably like wallets having like good UX around signature-based orders will help. They all have signatures, and like other sites have done like signature-based orders before. But the more like the wallets can be aware of like the UX implications of this, the better. That's about. I'd say that like people can start like looking at the cross-chain smart contracts and thinking about how to build adapters for other bridges if they wanted, if devs want to get involved in that. Generally, like infrastructure around alternative like. So a cool thing is that like when a user signs an order, they're incentivized to like broadcast that order as broadly as possible. They want as many fillers to discover that as possible. Similarly, if you're a filler, you want to discover as many orders as possible. And so having like redundancy at the like broadcasting layer, like like today we have mempools and whatever for Ethereum transactions, like having like alternate like APIs for hosting signed orders, stuff like that could be helpful or interesting. I think over time there'll be like it won't just be like one API for hosting these signed orders, right? And that's not the goal. So things that like help further the decentralization and I guess is also desired. But yeah, I don't know. That's a bunch of stuff.
That's a lot of surrounding infrastructure. Again, a lot of moving parts, a lot of complexity, but also protocols that harness complexity is kind of a core theme of not just the Uniswap in the last year or so, but really crypto at large, I would say. Hayden, it's been a crazy year for Uniswap in 2023. You got the mobile wallet, Uniswap V4, now UniswapX. We're only halfway through the year. Are you going to be on again before the end of the year?
I think I'll be on. I'm expecting 2 to 3 more times
in 2023.
Probably.
Oh my God! What else is coming?
We got some things lined up. I can show you privately after this podcast.
All right. Well, apparently, Bankless Nation, you can hold your breath because Hayden Adams will be back for more Uniswap releases. Just the absolute juggernaut in 2023. Hayden, thank you for being just such a strong bear market builder and really pushing the space forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and always love coming on Bankless. And yeah, we're trying to decentralize finance. So
yeah. Yes, we are. And we're doing it a little bit jet lagged at the very start of ETHCC. Both Hayden and I landed coming from the East Coast just a number of hours ago. So that's aping into ETHCC with the podcast. Hayden, thank you so much for joining me on Bankless today.
Thanks for having me on.
Cheers. Bankless Nation, you know the deal. Crypto is risky. DeFi is risky. UniswapX is a brand new protocol. It's probably also risky too, just because all things are. You can lose what you put in. We are headed west, however. It's not for everyone, but we are glad you are with us on the Bankless journey. Thanks a lot.